Hey DC, did you know that it's Arbor Week? And that means it's the perfect time to learn about and protect our trees. Local nonprofit Casey Trees is helping to protect our tree canopy by teaching kids the value of trees and working with them to plant new ones. The trees they're planting now ensure that future Washingtonians have a beautiful and healthy city. So support Casey Trees today by giving online at caseytrees.org/give. Your tax-deductible donation will go directly toward tree planting efforts in historically underserved communities, including schools in Wards 5, 7, and 8. Once again, that's caseytrees.org/give. Let's plant some trees, y'all.
Today on CityCast DC, so the Connecticut Avenue bike lane, which occupied an awful lot of emotion and energy in DC over the last couple of years, is not going to happen. That's what the district's Department of Transportation, DDOT, revealed at a budget hearing. Sauleh Siddiqui is an advisory neighborhood commissioner in Cleveland Park, which is right along the route of that bike lane. He was very much for it. We sat down with him to talk less about the merits of the bike lane than it wasn't, but to talk instead about where DC and DC's bike infrastructure go from here. Today is Wednesday, April 24th. I'm Michael Schaefer, and here's what DC is talking about. Hey, Sauleh.
Hey, Mike.
So the highly contested Connecticut Avenue bike lane, which occupied an awful lot of civic conversation in a big city, has been canceled. What happened?
For a bit of background, in December 2021, the mayor approved the plans for Concept C, which included protected bike lanes on Connecticut Avenue. This was chosen by the mayor after an extensive community engagement process consisting of over 70 public meetings, community walkthroughs, interactive sessions, and focus groups over the last 4 years. All of the ANCs on Connecticut Avenue have overwhelmingly supported Concept C. We have 24 commissioners in favor, with only 2 against and 2 abstaining. So one thing I do want to point out is that calling this option contentious goes against all the data and the engagement.
Wait a minute. Wait. What about the business community? They were upset about parking spaces being taken away on Connecticut Avenue. They made a stink about that. There were plenty of people who were against it, maybe not the elected ANC commissioners, but let's not pretend like this was a thing with unanimous community support across DC.
Well, if you look at any part of the democratic process in which, this was held over 2 different elections. Like I ran over for this election twice, over 2 different elections when this concept was chosen. And yes, there were businesses that had concerns about parking, but it wasn't that all the businesses were against it. And yes, there are people who had not favored having protected bike lanes over there. But when Concept C was chosen, it was actually chosen as a compromise. Because what Concept C did was it installed protected bike lanes, but also included 24-hour parking on one side.
All right, so is this like over, or are you all trying to push to revive the patient on the table here?
The community, once they found out about it, is incredibly angry about this. I have received a lot of angry phone calls and emails about exactly what happened. And in reality, this was something that came as a surprise to us because after the mayor had announced and the decision had been made, suddenly at a budget hearing, the acting director of DDOT, announced that protected bike lanes weren't part of the plan anymore. We don't know what the new plan looks like. We've been given very little details. And so the question now is, do we as a community let DDOT go forward with this plan that has gone against the process that was laid out by the mayor and chosen? It goes against the principles of safety and making this avenue safer. While parking does reduce the number of travel lanes, it actually increases the likelihood that an accident can occur. And crashes that occur from parking spots, while not be as fatal as moving crashes, they're much more frequent and actually much more dangerous for children because the sight lines are reduced when you pull in and out of parking. And finally, the third thing is this is actually worse for downtown because you're reducing the total number of lanes on Connecticut Avenue while at the same time not providing any other option to get downtown. So right now, what our goal is that we're trying to engage council to understand how we can use the budget process to not let this go forward. We don't like the status quo, but at the same time, if DDOT is going to spend our tax dollars on an option that they have not vetted with the community, an option that right now looks unsafe, then that's something we would like to stop through the budget.
Can we back up for a second?
Sure.
What did the city DDOT say about why they cut it?
They have not given many details. They have just said that this option is no longer on the table.
All right. So DDOT has this whole Connecticut Avenue improvement plan. It's supposed to make it easier to turn left, make various things safer. Do you think the whole improvement plan has failed because of the lack of this bike lane?
So one, DDOT says they have a plan. No one has seen that plan. So they can say that they might have left turn pockets, but no one has seen exactly what that looks like. They can say that they're going to install bulb outs, but no one has seen what that looks like or where those are going to be installed. If I just go by those details, this new plan doesn't achieve the goals for safety that DDOT has laid out.
I mean, you're citing a lot of process stuff here, but to me, I live right off Connecticut Avenue. I feel like the community, such as it is, has had our say in like a billion meetings.
Yeah.
This is like not an unknown issue in the city.
Mm-hmm.
The pro side was very well articulated. The con side was very well articulated.
Yeah.
This idea that there was a sort of 11th hour sneak attack on an unwitting population seems not quite right to me.
Why does it not seem quite? Because there wasn't an announcement about it, special announcement. This was an oversight hearing where only because a council member asked a question that the director actually announced that.
Well, how are these things supposed? I mean, what would be the better way to announce it?
I think a much better way to announce it would be if DDOT did want to change the plan, is to say, we are reopening the engagement process. We would like to tell the community that the plan that was under consideration is not in consideration. Lay out the exact reasons why. Document them exactly why this is not under consideration. And then go through the community engagement process before they make another decision. Not answer a question at an oversight hearing, where if the council member had not asked that question, we would never have known.
This process took like years, right? I mean, your DC council member, Matt Fruman, wrote a letter saying it took longer than it did to put a man on the moon,
Yes.
Which is, I think, not 100% accurate, but it's close enough. And it sounds to me like what you're asking for is more process. I mean, it seemed to me like they did this and then they reached a decision. It just was like not a favorable one to the point of view you have and that a lot of the other electeds have.
So what I want to be clear about is I do not want more process. We should stick to the plan that came out of the process and move forward with Concept C as soon as possible, because that is what the process told us. The process was very long, and at the end of that long process, this is what we came up with. However, if now DDOT is deciding to change the plan without even telling us what the plan is, at a minimum, they owe us the details of what's going to happen. And they owe us the community engagement for us to be able to respond to that. You live on Connecticut Avenue, right? I live on Connecticut Avenue. For me, like, the most important thing is this is my community. This is where I live. This is where I go and walk outside. I'm actually not a bicyclist. For me, like, I want my streets where my friends, my family, my constituents live, and I want that street to be safer. And if I have no idea what's going to happen to that 6-lane highway in front of my house, if I have any indication that it's going to become even less safe for the people that live there, then of course, I would like to know what DDOT is doing. More going forward with the old process, I 100% think when it comes out of community engagement, we should move forward with it.
Hey, DC art lovers! Award-winning actress and playwright Anna Devere Smith is giving a 4-part lecture series at the National Gallery of Art. It is called Chasing That Which Is Not Me / Chasing That Which Is Me. Smith is known for her roles in The West Wing, Inventing Anna and Nurse Jackie, so you definitely want to come take a listen. They'll be every Sunday from April 28th to May 19th at 2 p.m. And the best part is they are totally free. Register to secure your spot at nga.gov/melon24. Let me ask you a question.
Sure.
We did a pretty good debate with you about this.
Okay.
You've been pretty involved. You are, like you said, you're in an anomalous position. You're a non-bicyclist, but you were very much for the bike lane. I have found the conversation around this to be really often like pretty insufferable. There's a lot of moralizing involved in it. There's on one side, it's kind of like, hey, kids, get off my lawn. On another side, it's a kind of like, get with the program, old man. And do you think, like from your side of this, is there anything you could have done differently that you think would have led to a different outcome?
I do not think that, for me personally, I do not think that there's anything different that I could have done. We engaged in the process when we were allowed to. This decision came outside of that process, right? When engaging with the process, ourselves, other members of the community, people who were for or who were against, had really open and frank conversations.
Do you have a sense that this is like a sort of a pendulum swinging moment about, and look, the city has invested pretty big in multimodal, invested big in bike infrastructure that has become kind of a culture war issue, unfortunately, rather than just a, what's the best, safest, most effective, most humane way of getting around town issue. From your point of view, is this sort of one decision about one particular bike lane, or is this a sign of bigger changes in which way the wind is blowing?
So I'll give you two examples here, and they might contradict each other, but I think this is how policy is working right now. So one of the more concerning things, even bigger than this, what came across from the budget hearing, was that the acting director said that even Move DC, which is a much larger plan in the District of Columbia about how mobility works in the city, even that is under consideration of not being followed, right? And so even bigger than Connecticut Avenue, I mean, the point you're making is is there something going on now with mobility all over the city? That is concerning.
And it's and against the context of a really rotten budget environment.
Sure, but there's other things in the budget that haven't been good. For example, the DDOT acting director said that close to 90% roads are actually paved in fair to excellent condition, but we're spending almost $180 million on repaving roads, whereas most of them are okay, right? So yes, it isn't against the backdrop of a very strict budget environment, but we make choices under that budget environment of what we want to do, right? But I do want to respond in a second way to your culture question. One of the things I've seen about cities is that anytime any type of change happens, and this can be not even related to bike lanes or mobility or anything else, anytime a change is proposed in a city, rightly so, there's people who talk about for the change and against the change. But what I have observed in my community and what's been observed in scientific literature is that once the change happens, then folks are actually very ready to go on board. I'll give you an example. Right across from where I live is the old Cleveland Park service lane. That was a long-standing community issue for a while, and it became part of the culture, became part of the conversation where there was, some people that were very, very against changing that service lane and keeping the parking there. And another group that, on the other side of the community that was like, no, we would like this to be a more pedestrian plaza. The plan was made to have a shared space. The plan went through and everything happened. And then post-pandemic, part of the community said, no, we would like to keep this a pedestrian space. And so RA&C had to make a decision about what was going to happen. And what I will tell you is that the person who was most arguing against having that just be a pure pedestrian plaza actually ended up cutting the ribbon for the pedestrian plaza once it was decided and once it was there. And so for communities like ours, sure, this might seem like a very contentious issue and change is always, always difficult. But what I have found is that whenever change happens like this, once the change actually takes place, people realize this isn't as bad as we imagine. In fact, there's a lot of positives to this change. And I do think that overall cities are evolving, cities are changing. And I do think eventually overall, our city of DC is going to keep changing and going towards this. And we're going to find, for the most part, change like this, which the community asked for, which makes us safer, which is better for the climate, which is better overall economically for downtown, for the businesses. That type of change will eventually happen and it'll take place. And then we'll all be much, much more happier when that happens.
If you assume that when the change happens and when this bike lane that was supposed to happen was inaugurated, people would realize, wow, it's not this terrible thing that it's been cast as. Was there anything folks who were in favor of it could have done to lay a trail of breadcrumbs so that people might feel more comfortable sooner? Because a lot of people, your neighbors, some of them, some business leaders, some of them, the people who use that road to commute in from Maryland and whose presence downtown is pretty important to the city economy, a lot of these people sort of never got on board with the idea. Was there more that could have been done to make it seem like a happy future for them too?
Yeah, no, that's a fantastic question. And that's actually being debated in the transportation literature right now. Not just about DC and not about this change, but how do we make people more comfortable with change, right? One idea has been that installing certain pop-up infrastructure at certain parts of Connecticut Avenue, just to see how that infrastructure might work, is actually been like one suggestion that's put forward, right? And so this doesn't mean that, we just sort of paint with bike lanes on one side of the street and say, oh, how is this going to happen? But this is kind of what we tried during COVID-19, right? Like, I think one of the reasons why the service lane ended up being something that is now the promenade and purely pedestrian is that people actually got to test it out. During COVID-19, that was actually closed to car traffic because we needed wider pedestrian spaces. Once people actually saw that, like, hey, I actually like this space, this change is actually overall very positive, that what was the impetus for us to getting that area purely pedestrian, right? And so one suggestion that I've seen, and I think is something that DDOT should try, is very quick, inexpensive methods to install some of this infrastructure and then let people experience it, right? We don't have to install the entire bike lane all the way from Calvert to Legation Street.
I'm having a hard time picturing this. What infrastructure are you talking about?
So let's say we go with DDOT's plan, right? And again, this is just me speaking, not necessarily DDOT or anyone else. I'm just representing myself. But let's say we had this plan from Calvert Street Northwest to Legation Street Northwest to install a protected bike lane, right? Let's say we took some blocks in there. Let's say we took the blocks from Calvert Street, because there's a bike lane that connects right to Calvert Street, right, where people come up from Rock Creek Park. And from Calvert Street up until Cleveland Park, let's say on one side of the road, DDOT installed a protected bike lane going north, right? And then introduced 24-hour parking on the other side. And then we let people test that out, right? Like, that type of infrastructure doesn't cost too much money. There'll be a slight sort of change in traffic patterns. But honestly, during COVID-19, we had that change anyways. Like, during COVID-19, DDOT removed rush hour parking restrictions. And so we were already reduced traffic on Connecticut Avenue. If at that time, we would have decided to install it, let people try it out, get some feedback from there, I think that type of stuff can actually really help people get used to it. And I also actually see it in action what happens.
Hey, Sauleh, thank you so much for being here.
Of course.
That's all for today here on CityCast DC. If you enjoyed the show, why not tell a friend, rate the show, leave us a review, and subscribe to our morning newsletter. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. Bye.